All right.
Good.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Welcome everybody to the Cleveland Community Police Commission. This is our first rules committee.
A little closer to the mic.
Sorry. Welcome everybody to the Cleveland Community Police Commission. This is our first rules committee meeting. It's Monday, February 6th, and we are starting at 5:06 p.m. Thank you everyone for joining us, both here and online. So welcome, and I want to do just a roll call. Adriana Rodriguez,
Present.
Chandra Benicio,
Present.
Charles Donaldson,
Present.
Jan Ridgway. Present. And I'm Terry Wong. Thank you so much. So our first order of business is the selection of the committee chair. Do we have any people that would like to be chair or nominate someone?
Is this for, may I ask a question?
Yes,
Is this for ongoing or just for this meeting?
ongoing.
Oh, okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I would like to nominate Terry Wang.
thank you so much. Is there a second to that?
I'll second it.
Is there anybody else? Chair asked if there's anyone else that would like to be considered for chair. No one else? Do we need to take a vote then? Yes,
You can just see if there's any nays, anyone in opposition.
everyone for, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, motion passes, is that? And thank you.
Yep.
All right, yay.
And just a quick point, Chair, from the last meeting, we learned, in this format, it's best to do roll call vote because, that way people can, we have a good record of it on the video of who's voting for each. So as you call votes in the future, just do roll call vote is best.
Do you think we need to redo the vote or can we move
We
on?
should be okay because you had no nays, so it's unanimous.
Thank you so much. So we are going to, the first point of, that we are going to address on the agenda is the introduction of the draft operations and procedures manual, otherwise known as the rules and bylaws, and which will follow up with a Q&A regarding the draft. And this is going to be done by our interim executive director, Jason Goodrich.
Good evening, everybody. I won't take too much time because we went over this a little bit at orientation, but I'll just hit on some points because I know that was a lot that we covered in orientation. So since this is specific to this document here, the Operations and Procedures Manual, it was distributed at orientation as part of the orientation book. And also we have copies here this evening if anyone is attending so they can see it. And so what this is, you'll hear it called bylaws or rules. It's a little more than that because we have a lot of operational stuff that we have to consider too in the future to get through certain things like hearings. How do we, which are part of 115, right? So how do we conduct an evidentiary hearing? How do we create a Brady-Giglio list? Those things are more procedural than they are rules. So it's kind of a manual that combines both of them. It also covers a little bit of basic ethical obligations, you know, work commitments and expectations from board members, which you'll hear that term board in here. It means the commission, they're synonymous. So there are other things in here other than strict bylaws, right? So the bylaws would be the part where it covers, you know, the different types of meetings. The bylaws do mirror Ohio Sunshine Law when it comes to that, right? The bylaws would also include what officer positions you want. 115 does say you have to have a chair, but this group would decide, is a chair enough? Do we need some other appointments to help complement the chair or the work that we have to do in the future, right? So that's where this would get considered, and we'll make those edits here as we go through. So the different sections in here, and there's a table of contents at the front. And again, we only have section 1. So the purpose is really just repeating 115. So the purpose is covers the responsibilities of the commission specifically in 115. And it just takes those right out of the charter and puts them in the front end of this book. So you have an easy place to reference them. There's really nothing you can do to edit it. The wording is, you know, straight from the city charter and as passed by the citizens of Cleveland last November. So that part, it just goes over your authority, so you have a quick reference. The scope and weight of this manual talks a little bit about how it works, right? And that is on page 6. So let's talk about why do we need a manual? We already have 115, right? So in addition to the Cleveland Charter, this operating manual contains all the rules, procedures, and processes and general operations of CPC. CPC is the short version of us. It's the way we've referred to ourselves for years as the Cleveland Community Police Commission, CPC. So you'll see that in here often. So if rules, procedures, process, or operations are codified elsewhere or functionally operational elsewhere and potentially, apparently, and or actually conflict with the provisions of this manual, the provisions of the manual, when adopted by the majority of the CPC, control. So that's just basically saying if there's anything else like the old bylaws, right, that are out there in existence from the previous commission, once you adopt these, that will supersede that. We can't supersede the city charter. We can't supersede the state sunshine law. But we can supersede old rules and whatever would have applied, right? So you always have to keep the charter in the city of Cleveland in mind when you adopt rules in the state of Ohio laws. We can't do that, go above and beyond that. So that's basically what this says here. And I know some of you have been on boards and things before, so this might be a refresher. I'm also going a little into it for the public's sake too, so they understand, people who haven't served on boards before, how that kind of works. So the next part of it is ethical responsibilities. And those are taken from the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. So it's basically their code of ethics that they recommend everyone adopt. There is a little tiny bit of tweaking there, like we put CPC in there, right? And things that are applicable to the city of Cleveland are in there. But generally you see the things like personal integrity, independence, transparency, and confidentiality, relationships with the community, commitment to doing the policy review, professional excellence standards. So it's kind of just reinforcing what I think the public's expectations of you all are anyway when it comes to how to operate ethically. Professional work expectations. So this is in here because there have been conflicts, right? So there are going to be occasional interpersonal conflicts about, people who are taking it more seriously or less seriously than others. And so sometimes, so it's nice to have kind of some guidelines about what the expectations are for work and work production as a general, as a commission as a whole, right? That each person can refer to and look back on. So it's basically covering, attendance, do your homework, that kind of stuff, be prepared for meetings, it's basic stuff. But it helps to have that because there have been a few conflicts in the past, and then it goes deeper into it a little bit later about attendance and stuff, what the exact, what that means, right, into the bylaws themselves, and what you can and cannot do as far as attendance, and then what other commissioners, once their rules are, what can happen to you if you were, to stop attending meetings and that kind of stuff. So there have been, not having standards causes problems. Once you set those, you typically don't have any problems because people have something to go back to and they know what their responsibilities are. So the organization stuff, this goes back to 115 again. So we are chartered. So, the organization is dictated by what the law says we are and how we are organized, how many commissioners, so we can't change that, right? What the composition of this board and body is supposed to be. But again, it's helpful to have it in here because that may come up over time, and then you can just look in your manual to see that.
Before you move from that, if you would, Chair,
Um,
on the
Chair,
composition.
did we, I did want to say, do we want, Jason, are you planning to go through the entire?
No, I'm just giving you a quick rundown of the.
And do you want to come back? Do we have any thoughts about, do you want to, Jason do his run through and
Yeah.
then we
And
come
then you
back to
guys
the
can take it
portions?
piece by piece. So I'll just,
Okay.
we're ahead of time, which is great. I probably won't even need the whole 15 minutes to get through this. So then you guys can go right into the discussion on what you want to change, where you want to go. So, or any questions. So that's a summary of 115. So obviously if you feel like, you want to go back to 115, you always can, but the word is cut and paste from there, for the most part. Term of membership is in there, vacancies, all these things are just similar to the way when you pass a law in Ohio, and then you have the administrative code, right? So that tells you how to implement that law. This is kind of the same deal there. Now, leadership, this is the first part where you'll see it does mention a chair. 115 gives basic powers to the chair, but you can add to that, right? So that's the base. So some of this is from the old bylaws here from the CPC combined with 115. So it tells you exactly what recommendation is, starting point of chair, what has worked in the past. Now, keep in mind, the CPC did have a co-chair system before, and having been through that, I think it works really well. It's a lot for one person to carry a chair load. It's not uncommon to do that, but in this work environment, it will be super hard to be a sole chair here, in my opinion. But again, that's the floor, right? So that's what the law says. We have to have a chair for this group, but it doesn't mean you can't create a co-chair or a vice chair, or however you see fit, whatever model you think will work best for you all. Because if you're a sole chair, then all of this falls on one person, right? And there's no backup to that. And in the past, having that backup has helped, because you'll get overwhelmed sometimes with media requests and you can't do it. The chair often gets called to do forums and things like that. You can't be at every one if you're that person all the time, right? Plus, the chair typically has had the direct supervisory responsibility for the executive director, right? So that's the person who the executive director will have the most contact with and check in day-to-day operations. And that goes for chairs of all groups. So if groups are running projects, right, it's typically the chair that will be the primary point of contact with the ED on any project for either a committee, a work group, or the whole, right? But somebody has to be the direct supervisor, and it's typically that position too. So that's just a little bit of what that would be there for a chair. The one thing that the chair doesn't have in this is some chairs have removal authority or appointment authority to committees. That has never been the way the CPC has operated, because we all come here, especially when it was volunteers, right? It wouldn't work very well if a chair had the power to remove someone off of a group that they were here to work on, right? If they wanted to work on police training, and then one person said, well, sorry, I don't want you to work on that. It just wouldn't have been appropriate in that environment. Not saying you couldn't do it here, but that's a extreme power that can cause a lot of conflict, in my opinion, to have somebody with that ability to appoint or remove people from boards or from committees and work groups. It's gone much better if people are there because they want to be there, and so that's just one other point that is worth mentioning there. So subcommittees, we talked about this. You guys are already in one, so you're doing a great job. There are some recommended subcommittees here as we get into our full operations and we start working on the police reform component of this. And those came from the powers and duties that are assigned under 115. That was the baseline for this, right? So you do have final authority and discipline, right? And the community has often mentioned accountability. So you definitely are going to need a group that works on that at some point. It doesn't have to be right away, but that's a suggested standing committee. Police training, you have final authority on police training. So that should be a committee that's always working, because that's a fast moving area. Police training is always changing, and they're developing new things, and they have academies coming in. So that's a huge amount of work. Police policy, your final authority on police policy. Their GPO book is about as big as this. So that's a lot of work unto itself. That committee will be plenty busy. And then outreach, the envision of that was, helping work with this office to develop a strategy to touch those communities that we are supposed to be out working with, making sure we do that type of stuff. Grants and budget, we've had one of those already, and our rules. So those would be your core. It doesn't mean that, there won't be a whole lot of need for some other committees, and, you might have special things come along. We don't know what the future holds. That will mean a committee has to be formed and then, dissolve based on work need. But I would recommend that these are good standing committees, because they're right out of 115. Those are core duties of 115 that this group is responsible for. So it helps to have a committee on the books doing that work. So staff, we covered a little bit about that. And it just covers executive director appointment, that how that's done off of 115 and what that position is. The duties, again, come right from 115. So it's very enumerated in 115, exactly what the executive director is responsible for. Basically, it's the operational part, right, and helping you all and advising strategy for the group as a whole. It's typical of any CEO or board in that way. So a board would have a CEO or an executive director, and then, they would help advise with strategy, and then they would go execute that strategy for everybody and report back on how that's functioning. So it's kind of that relationship, and that's just codified here under 115, right? It talks about how you remove an executive director, which is in 115, what the staffing levels of this office would be, and then reporting structure and day-to-day operations. This is in here because we had to have a consultant come in 2018 to help with that, because as I had mentioned a little bit in orientation, 2015, the CPC was appointed, and they had to do their own work for 2 years until an executive director arrived. And then it was hard to deconflict that, right? Because they were already a very working board. So they were having a hard time stepping back and getting out of the day-to-day operations part and just moving back to the board, the broader board work that was outlined in the consent decree. So this comes from the recommendations of that consultant is, good boards trust the executive director and the office staff to do what they're supposed to do. And you have to have clear lines of division there, right? So this wording comes kind of out of that a little bit, what their recommendations were in 2018. And it's kind of the executive director reports to the chair, and will have unfettered discretion exercising their powers and duties related to operations of the commission, right? So basically, the board works on those enumerated 25 or 26 things related to police reform, and then the executive director works and the staff works on those things under the executive director's purview. And if you maintain those lines, I'm not saying they don't get blurred a little bit because we're a small shop, right? So in big places, you don't see board members, talking to staff very often that are like, in positions that are on not executive positions. But here, you're going to work with these staff members closely because we just are a smaller shop, and some of you are going to pursue projects and you're going to be right in there with them. So the important thing there is just to remain in communications with whoever the executive director is, and so that there's clear communication on what's going on in those groups and how we're interacting, right? So orientation and training, this just again goes from 115, and it does have a recommended set of topics in there. This was worked on when I was waiting for this board to be appointed. In interim, we were looking at all the things we thought you might need and could help you succeed, and that's where this list came from. So it's a little bit repetitive with the training committee because they're going to talk about this too and refine it, but they're so generalized that, each thing in there touches on something in 115 in some way. And it was vetted. I worked with Aisha, who's the interim monitor, on it to see if I was missing anything. And I think we came up with a good list that covers most topics, right? And so the one thing is, you guys have to set how much training you think you need. Do you need continuing education, all that stuff? And the training committee will help feed into that. So it's not something the rules committee has to come up with on their own. We could plug in the training committee's work into this and then adopt it as a formal rule once we're set on that later. Budget, again, budget committee work can plug into these rules, but this is just covering the basics of what it will be. Grants, it talks about what we have to do with that. Your compensation, that's in there. So none of that, that's all 115 stuff as well. And then you get in the part where general meetings, and this is based off of, again, the old commission's bylaws and Ohio Sunshine open public meeting laws. There's nothing in here that's novel or out of the ordinary for that. So it just says a normal order of business. So you have a point to go back to when you create agendas, right? And one of the things that's different is Ohio Sunshine Law does not mandate public comment, but 115 does. So, and the specific thing is that our meetings generally must allow for a reasonable opportunity for the public to comment, right? So that's open to interpretation by this group, what that means, but it definitely exists in there. So most meetings should have public comments, specifically the general meetings, right, where the whole board is together. And committees are welcome to have public comment too, whenever you guys feel it's appropriate, if you need some public input on it. Especially as you get to the police policy work and those reform-based committees, I would recommend the reasonable opportunity apply to them as well. But this just says a general standard to follow. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to. It mentions executive session use. And 121.22 is the reference for that. So we don't repeat everything in the Ohio Sunshine Law in our bylaws. We don't cut it. You know, it's kind of a general summary of that. And it talks about the different types of meetings. You can call a special meeting in addition to your general meeting. And that again is sunshine law stuff. You can call an emergency meeting. When would that be appropriate for this commission? So we will have something might happen, a crisis, right? It's the police department. It's not a matter of if something happens, it's a matter of when there is something that happens that causes tension between the public and the Cleveland Division of Police. And people will want to hear from the commission during that time. So that would be an example of when you would call an emergency meeting. An emergency meeting has different standards for posting. You can do it, and that's that 24-hour minimum standard, and the minimum notification is to the media. So you can move quickly as a group. That's within the law to be able to do so if you follow it. But again, none of this is all mostly mirroring Ohio Sunshine Law. Work groups are different. That's something we've always done, so that's more of a tradition here. It's not specifically discussed at the state of Ohio law what a work group is, but it's kind of more finite than a committee. So committees, they're composed of commissioners, right? So you guys are forming small groups. Work groups are a little bit different. They're a combination of staff and committee members and members of the public who we want to bring in, right? So they can feed into a committee. So you can have a research topic where you want some subject matter expertise, you want the staff involved in that, and they're a little less formal. So we would get together where they would be public. We've done in public as well, but then you'll really get into an issue, right? And you'll have the right people in the room. You supplement your own knowledge and experience with subject matter experts in those work groups, and you form them around policy issues or whatever you're dealing with. And it's worked really well in the past. I've always called us a think tank, if you think of it that way, right? So when we were just volunteers and all we can do is recommendations, the best tool we had is bringing the greatest minds we can get together to work a problem and then bring that problem forward. Because if you want a recommendation to succeed, well, if it's made by some of the best people from the community who really have the heart for that, or the knowledge or expertise or education for it, then they really turn out to be stellar level recommendations and work every time. So that's kind of how I've always thought of those work groups as the think tank model, where give us a problem and we'll put the best minds we can on it. So I hope to see continuance of that in here. That's why it's mentioned in here. And then attendance and participation rules. This is all based on the past commission's experience. It was in their bylaws. There's a little bit of it from CPRB's bylaws in here too, the way they run their standards, right? So that's the Civilian Police Review Board. They're the other body who oversees the complaint process for the Cleveland Division of Police from civilians. So the closer we are in alignment with them, if you guys have the same standards and stuff like that, it just makes it a little bit cleaner, so that there's not dramatic differences between the different boards working in the oversight thing. But it's pretty standard. You can tweak it, if you think, the notification time. So in here, it's 72 hours notice that's worked. If you can, reasonable effort should be given to provide notice more than 72 hours in advance, barring emergencies. It lists what emergencies might be. It gives examples of excused absences versus not. We've had problems with attendance in the past. It's a little different when you're volunteers. I would say there's probably going to be a tighter standard for community members on this group, because you guys are stipend this time. So in the past, we could say, well, hey, these are people who are volunteering their time. You guys are getting a stipend for it. So, but there have been commissioners who've been heavily criticized for their attendance, and the public does watch that. They know who's sitting at these meetings. They check the minutes, and they will use people's attendance records against them if they feel like they're not meeting the commitment in the spirit of 115 and not putting in the work. It's also caused some great conflict between commissioners in the past. So it is something that's important in these rules to really have a solid attendance and tardiness policy, right? And also actions for what the board might want to do if somebody is having difficulty meeting the carrying the weight, you know. So we divided amongst 13 commissioners. It's not unusual that there are some commissioners who do far more on a scale of work than others, right? But there has to be at least a minimum standard somewhere of this is our expectations of at least a minimum amount of work, right? If people want to go far above that, okay, that's great. But there are people who sometimes slip below that for whatever life reasons. It's not about judgment. It's just about the health of the group as a whole. That's why we put that in there. So I'm at my time here, and I think that about covers it. And we've already know the chair pro tem part of it, and the executive director is the secretary. Quorum and voting, that's the last part. You can do a little tweaking there. If you want to look at that more closely, you know, there is some flexibility, but mostly it's Robert's Rules of Order stuff there, you know, how you do that. The question did come up about chairs voting. I highly recommend you allow chairs to vote all the time, because again, you know, you're always here, everybody's here. So if, you know, the issue of can the chair from this group vote on an issue that comes forward to the whole, why wouldn't you want to vote on the work you helped create, right? I think that's an issue that is, we've never had that exclusion in the past. Everybody has one equal voice in every vote, always in the past, the way we've done things, and it's worked really well. So that's just one point that popped in my mind there to think about. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goodrich. So now we will move on to the committee business, which is a discussion of the rules and bylaws that Mr. Goodrich just very succinctly summarized for us. Is there any discussion on how we should proceed? Do we want to go in chronological order? Are there certain sections we want to focus on? So I welcome the discussion. Chair recognizes Commissioner Benito.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just suggest that we go through and, you know, share notes and thoughts and concerns and then work to that.
Great. Is there any opposition to that? Can we proceed? Okay, great. So we will proceed in that manner. We're looking at section 1, which is the administrative rules. As Mr. Goodrich has already stated, this is nearly a verbatim from Charter 115. Is there any discussion or points of contention, confusion, clarification needed in this section?
Yes, Madam Chair, and this is to, going for you to add states and clarification.
I think if it's possible, could we actually, when you're
All right, I
talking,
keep remembering.
have people take their mask off? Yeah.
I'm gonna just talk louder. I'm on campus
Okay.
road. I
Yeah,
don't
that's
wanna
fine.
take my mask off.
But yeah, just use the mic.
Yeah, I just use the mic to speak louder, yeah. Okay, so I do have, sort of general questions to begin with. I just want to know, where do the bylaws end? Because you said part of this would be bylaws,
Mhm.
and some of the other would just be operating procedures.
Mm-hmm.
So where in this document, this manual, do the bylaws end and general operating rules begin?
And I think that's so anything that is setting a clear rule that's unique to this would be a bylaw. So when you say, you know, these are the meetings, these are your attendance criteria, that's bylaw, right? So obviously you're adopting into your rules, and rules and bylaws are synonymous, exactly what's in 115, but that's not uncommon when you look at Ohio code. So I don't think there's a clear definition of ending that. I would say if you were going to call something bylaws, you can just call this whole section your bylaws and be fine, right? So the second section you can call your procedures if you need to use that wording. That's what I would do. I would say these are our bylaws. These are our. But for instance, Civilian Police Review Board uses a manual, right? So that's, and their bylaws are included in that manual the same way these are. So that's what this is modeled after, right? So they meet that criteria of having bylaws inside the manual when they were combined now.
Okay, the reason I ask is because as bylaws, I would think we would want to comply as close as possible. If it's just general operating procedures, I definitely think there should be,
And that's why it says.
some flexibility.
Yeah.
And I guess, let me just give you one example of what I'm talking about. So if we were to go over to, page 12, looking at subcommittee. And, it says subcommittees must consist of at least 3 persons, but not more than 5. And I know that some of our subcommittees and our committees are not in compliance with this. So is this now part of bylaws, or is this just general operating procedures? Do we care what these numbers are? And these are the kinds of things that concern me, because I think we need to be in compliance with bylaws. Now, we can flex a little bit more, it's just general operating. So this is a good example of that for me, because we do have some subcommittees that exceed this 5-member criterion.
And so that's why the section 1 says rules, right? So these would be rules, but even in your rules, like even in the law, sometimes it says shall, right? And sometimes it says should, right? So that's how you incorporate, not every rule is hard and fast. So you'll see words like that, shall, in here, right? And
So
that's when it's an absolute. So that was just a guideline. So these aren't adopted yet. So the 3 and 5 are just a starting number. You guys can change that tonight, right? And then it would become, if you adopt it, it would become a rule, right? Or you could say, we don't want to have a number on it and we want to be flexible, and you can change that to a should. It could say, should have a minimum of 3, but the problem is you don't, from experience, the reason 3 is in there is you don't want to have a 2-person group ever. It just doesn't work. So 3 would be, that's why you would use like shall for that. You would say shall have at least 3, but recommended not to go over 5 if you wanted to make it a little more flexible. And it's still a bylaw then, because some bylaws have a little bit of flexibility in it. They're not all hard and fast absolutes all the time in bylaws. So
I just think we work harder to comply with bylaws.
yeah.
So I was just trying to understand this, because I'm not concerned as much about the 3-member minimum, but I know we have some that exceed the 5.
So would you say 5 to 7?
I don't have any, I'm just trying to understand where bylaws and general rules began, that's all.
And rules are, and Delonte, maybe you can help me. Is there a real difference between rules and bylaws?
No. I mean, I don't think so, right? I mean, and I think your point is very well taken, that your bylaws, you should be absolutely sticking by, right? You don't want to be in violation of your bylaws. I don't know if I necessarily see a difference per se, right? Because if you're making a rule or procedure, you want to follow that just as closely, I would imagine, right? I think the only thing that actually makes it different is if you make it different, right? If you say, hey, this is the bylaw and we're going to impose some type of penalty for some type of violation thereof, but we're not going to pose a penalty if we violate these things over here, then you've now created the difference. But I imagine if you're making some rule, regardless of what you call it, the nomenclature, the goal is to try to stick to it. So, and with this particular example, I think that's actually a really good point. And something I was actually going to mention anyway, so I'll mention it now since we're just talking about it. But because I saw that, when you guys have broke up into committees and how a couple of them, have a larger number, which is actually problematic. And you don't want that. And I actually would legally recommend anyway, kind of sticking to what's here in terms of the 3 to 5, because with the risk you run now is if you have a 7-member committee, you have a quorum for the entire commission. Right. And now that matter does not need to go back before the whole commission if something is decided in the committee. right? So another reason why the goal is for it to be smaller so that it requires going back to the board. So that's something else I think, as a whole, you guys want to think about.
Very good point. Chair recognizes Commissioner Benito.
Yeah, I think just, Jen, that's a really good observation, and I think we're not technically out of compliance right now because we haven't adopted any of these. So, but it does bring up a question, if we do adopt these sooner rather than later, then I think we would need to adjust the membership of those temporary committees. It's also my understanding that those committees that, like, we formed are technically temporary. So my understanding is that even though I'm currently on the Rules Committee, once we actually break out and, like, formalize these committees, I might not be on the Rules Committee. That at least is my understanding when we then decide what committees are going to be on. But it's also my understanding that the committees, the Commissioner Training Committee and the hiring committee are both, but my understanding was they were all temporary, and then we would be, but especially those two committees won't even exist long term. So yeah. Thanks, Jen.
Which two that may not exist long term? Which two may not exist long term?
The executive director hiring and the commissioner training. Once we finish our training and once we make the final hire decision, yeah.
And to the chair, if I may, just remember too, you can always, like, if you go through this, you can make a few changes and adopt them as interim rules for now, and then the rules committee can work to build them into a permanent set, right? So it's better to have some rules to start with and say, and then you can say, oh, that's definitely not working. We need to take that back to rules committee and change it. So I think a goal would be to give yourself a starting set if you can tonight, just to give you some guidelines and some solid rules to go by. And then you can just keep working and tweak them through this committee, as quickly as you can. But the sooner you have some rules in place, the better you will have in a way to resolve conflicts.
Thank you so much, everybody. So it seems like we have a better sense of how these rules and guidelines and bylaws will be enforced and applied and their outcome. So would we like to continue going through chronologically, go back to section 1.1 and move forward that way? Yes. Okay, great. So so we've already discussed section 1.1 is the purpose of the Community Police Commission. Is there anything in that section that merits more discussion? This is a verbatim from Charter 115. Mr. Goodrich, could you tell the community members where they can find a copy of the charter? This is a little more extensive, I think, than is usually available.
Yeah, it's on Cleveland City Council's website, and the section you want to look up is 115-5. So if you did want to look up exactly what the commission, what the law that the commission put the commission here and what the responsibilities are, if you go on to Cleveland City Council's website, there is a place to look up the charter, and if you click on Cleveland City Charter, it'll have a search, and you put 115.5 as the section.
Thank you so much. No more discussion on that. We will move on to section 1.2, which is the scope and weight of this operating manual and conflicts of law. Any discussion there? Oh,
Just looking around.
Even any points of clarification?
Not
Great. Then we will move on to section 1.3, duties and responsibility of the commission, its members and staff. And the first subsection is 1.3.1, ethical responsibilities. As Mr. Goodrich had stated, that this is a version of the NACO Code of Ethics. So we can begin discussion here. I'm sure there are some that I see who would like to begin. Commissioner Donaldson?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to confirm that these are exactly from NACO. I did look at it briefly, and the tweaks were just made to specify CPC, correct?
I can get the original version for you to compare if need be. But these are also repeated in CPRB's manual as well. So they've
Okay.
already gone through court vetting and things of that nature.
Okay.
So, but I'll pull those up and send you a copy right now as we're moving through.
Okay, and for those listening, NACO stands for National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. Chair recognizes Commissioner Benicio.
Adriana just, with her fabulous memory of the binder, it is in the binder, so it's on, section 6, the first part of section 6 of our binder. So, the code of ethics is in there also.
Commissioner Dawson, would you like to proceed with this section? Would you like to confirm that?
No. I just wanted to confirm that the only tweaks were made were CPC tweaks.
Okay.
Because I did look at it briefly, and I noticed that, things were changed around to say CPC versus whatever is in there, but I just wanted to confirm that he knew that was exactly what was done.
Thank you so much. So we can begin discussion. Chair recognizes Delonte Thomas, Chief Ethics Officer of the city.
So just as another point of reference for the commission, in addition to the NACO code of ethics, what will supersede and otherwise also take effect is that the commission is also you all are also public officials, and so there is a state ethics law that, again, I would recommend the inclusion as a reference in addition to NACO's code of ethics. Is that clear that you all are also subject to the provisions of section 102 or chapter 102 of the Ohio Revised Code, as well as chapters or sections 29, 21.42 and 43.
Can you repeat those numbers?
Yeah. So the entire chapter 102 of the Ohio Revised Code applies to all public officials and public employees. And then sections 29, 21.41, or excuse me, 0.42, and then 29, 21.43 are also provisions that apply to all public officials and public employees. And again, these are all revised codes, so these are all criminal in nature.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Do we have discussion of this? This is, my understanding, it is mandatory and compulsory because it's of criminal legal nature. Does anybody have, do we need to move to include them? Commissioner Benicio?
Should we add those?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that would be nice, just
Would
so
someone,
that it's in here, people don't have to go looking for it.
sure, would someone like to make a motion to that effect?
Yeah, I'll move to add the sections from the state code of ethics, the numbers that Delonte just read alone
Okay.
to the section on the duties and responsibilities.
So the motion is to include the Ohio Revised Code, Chapter 103, Section 29.21-43 and 29.21-43 to the section of our bylaws that deal with ethical responsibilities. Do I hear a second for that motion?
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Rodriguez, we'll take a roll call vote on this. Do we need?
And then just as a point of reference as well, I mean, or I guess recommendation anyway, I probably would include, and again, you can decide exactly what the language will say, right? But to include that the commission is also subject to both Ohio and city ethics law, because there are also city provisions as well. The city provisions are a little bit more spread out than the revised code, right? So there's not just kind of one chapter I can point you to with respect to the city code, or city code and ordinances, I should say. So I think the thought would be is that subject to both state and city ethics law, including but not limited to chapter 102 of the revised code and 29, 21.42 and 43 is probably how I would recommend wording it.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Would anybody like to make an amended motion to that effect? Commissioner Benito?
I'll motion to add the language that, commissioners are also, subject to city ordinances, although it sounds like it wouldn't make sense to copy and paste the text in there, but we can just have a note. I also, while we're making some friendly amendments, maybe we should credit the new code of ethics in here and say. Oh, you're right,
Yeah.
sorry, my bad. Sounds good.
So we have an amended motion to, in addition to the revised NACO Code of Ethics for section 1.3.1 for our ethical responsibilities for the commission, we're adding, in addition, state and local ethics laws under the advisement of the ethics officer of the city, Delonte Thomas. Any second to that motion?
I second.
Thank you, Commissioner Donaldson. Let's take a roll call vote on this. Commissioner Rodriguez,
Yes.
Commissioner Benito,
Yes.
Commissioner Donaldson,
Yes.
Commissioner Ridgway,
Yes.
and Commissioner, I will vote yes. So motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And are there any other points of discussion for this section? Okay, so we will move on to section 1.4, which deals with the organization of their board. The first subsection 1 is about the composition of the board. Open the floor to discussion.
Briefly, before we go there, I did have another question. Under professional work expectations, I just wanted a general idea from Jason of what equivalent productivity activities would include, or maybe examples of that. It's under 1.2.3 or 1.3.2.
Oh, oh, yes, sorry, I skipped that section.
Yeah, that's
so
fine.
sorry. It's at the bottom.
Work
We're at the
expectations.
Yeah.
professional work expectations,
Okay.
section 1.3.2.
And you're to the chair.
The
to the
third,
chair to,
yeah, the third bullet from the bottom.
Third bullet, okay.
From the bottom, sorry.
Oh, from the bottom.
Yeah.
1, 2.
Yeah, the equivalent productivity activities. I just wanted an example of, what the thoughts were around that.
Great question. So equivalent productivity activities. So there will be times where you're being asked to speak on panels and things like that, right? So if you're not on an active work group, but you're out there, really engaging with the community, that's kind of what that would be, right? So you guys ultimately will be the judges of that. I don't think it's going to be a conflict. Most people are going to get, do most of their work through the committees, but so it just gives you, if you're not working on a committee, there are other things you can do. Researching, you can be in here working on, research and policy or working on a study, that kind of stuff. So, and if it's an easy thing, we can just add some examples.
Commissioner Johnson, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Ridgway, chair recognizes. Do you have, no?
No, not in reference to 1.3.2.
So, are there any further discussion of section 1.32, which details our professional work expectations? And I will note that some of these things are probably spoken about in more specific detail later on. So we will move on if there's no objections to section 1.4. 1.41 deals with the composition of the board. Open the floor to discussion.
Commissioner Benito?
I believe that this is direct language from Charter 150.
Right. This is also direct language from Charter 115, 13-member commission and the requirements of the commission. Any further discussion?
Madam Chair, I have one question, and I guess it would be directed either to Jason or to,
Can you get a little closer to the mic?
yeah, I'm sorry. I was close and my papers were rattling. I have to remember to turn that off, yeah. So the question I have is, in reference to the composition of the board, even though we know that not every one of these areas, not every area is represented, is there a need for us to qualify that somehow, or we just leave it as is?
So, well, you can't change the charter.
Exactly,
So-
but I mean in terms of another statement that we could make.
No,
Okay.
only because for the commission to make, I guess to put some type of additional, statement, I mean, would also, I guess, technically be an interpretation, right? To be able to say, hey, we think there should be X, Y, and Z based on the charter language. And by law, it's the law director who can make the official interpretations of the city's charter.
Okay.
So I would, I would say leave the charter language as is and let that be up to the law director and the courts to determine whether or not,
Any
there could be
addition?
another additional addendum or interpretation or what have you. Or essentially it needs to go back to the voters of the city to add an addendum or change it or make things more clear or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, the intention was not to change the language. I know it has been a bone of contention,
Sure,
so I
sure.
wanted to know if there was anything that we could do to address that outside of changing the language. But I appreciate the clarification as far as that needs to be done by the law department. Yeah, thank you.
But I would say, I mean, to the extent that the commission can be influential in that, right? I think it's not necessarily what you document in writing, but how you advocate, right? For if and when there are vacancies and nothing stops you from being able to say that, hey, we feel like we need this and this is who the mayor needs to appoint, or this is what's needed on the commission. You certainly are well within your right to do that. I would just hesitate to put something in writing saying, hey, we think this is what should, at least to your bylaws essentially.
Yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
for the clarification. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Ridgway and Mr. Thomas. Any further discussion? It is, again, in Charter 115-5, for those who want to refer back to that section. We're moving on now to section 1.42, term of membership. Discussion here. If I may, did you?
Go
Commissioner
right
Ridgway,
ahead. Go
If
right
I
ahead.
may, I did need a point of clarification. Because it seems like we have two slightly contradictory clauses. One says, I'll read, the first commissioners appointed after 115.5's effective date shall be divided into two classes. The first class of 7 will have a 4-year term, and for the first term, only a second class of 6 will have a 2-year term. After the first class, all commissioners will be appointed to serve 4-year terms. Does that mean that the second class of 6 that some of us are in, I think I remember something about upping years in the first discussion. Do you remember that? Does that mean the second class of 6 will only be able to serve a 2-year term?
No. So essentially all it does is it effectively creates a staggered term set, right? So after those commissioners who have a 2-year term can then apply again or seek reappointment to a 4-year term. So it wouldn't be for another 2-year term. And then it just will continue to be 4 years for everybody after that.
And to the chair, I'll just make sure that that's not a typo that I had in there that makes it a little more confusing than it has to be. So I'll go in and double check that language to make sure that that there's not a typo in there. Because I see the conflict where it says the first class is 7, and then it says after the first class. So let me just double check the wording on that. And it'll be, there's no need to vote on that. I don't think I can make that change. This one just right out of 115. So I'll just check that it comports with 115.
And another point of clarification, no commission member may serve more than 4 full 4-year terms, either consecutively or non-consecutively. Is there,
I do not think the charter
I think it speaks to us.
speaks on whether or not
just
you
in
can take a
total?
break or not. Come back.
Okay,
Uh,
all right. So.
which could be up for discussion. I mean, since it's with the charter being silent to that, you know, that could be something that, you know, comes to something that perhaps you could decide on in a bylaw, perhaps, for something that the charter does not speak to.
So, is there any discussion about this? So the charter allows for in total 16 years max. Is that okay? So, but it's the question of, is it consecutive, non-consecutive? We obviously want to have a diversity of opinions on the commission. We also want to retain the knowledge that past commissioners have gained. Is this something that we want to discuss now or come back to later? Okay. So we will come back to this later, and then we'll mark this as section 1.42, term of membership requires further discussion. Now we move on to section 1.43, vacancies of the board. And basically designates how a board can be vacant and what must be done once there is a vacancy. Right, are there any discussion here? And
I did have one question.
Commissioner Johnson?
Just confirm with the language of board versus commission, was this taken straight from 115 as well? I know that the previous
So
section was.
there is a part of this that is part of the bylaws, I believe, too, and parts of the CPRB manual. So, for instance, the resignation part. So let's see here if I can find it. Vacancies during term shall be federal mayor responsible. Commissioner desires to resign shall notify the chair, the mayor, and the clerk of the council. Now, I think this is all 115. So now that I'm reading it. So the only part there that said, so this was a point of contention. So look at the part that starts vacancies, the paragraph that starts vacancies of any of the represented groups outlined in 115.5 shall not disrupt or interfere with the commission's ability to conduct business. That is not in 115, right? But it's important to clarify that. That's why that's in there, because you can have a full stop of work if somebody were to say, oh, well, we're missing an attorney right now. And I think that came up, the reason I put that in there is because I think that came up actually with Delonte in a conversation in a hallway. And I'm like, ooh, that's a good point. We don't want the police to be able to, or anyone else to be able to say, you're not functional board because you're missing this person or that person. So if it's in your rules, it might help to clarify that a little bit. It doesn't mean they can't challenge it, but just saying that missing one component of those specific groups that 115.5 says. For instance, right now, I think we don't have an attorney who has civil rights experience or has sued the police. So someone might say, hey, you guys can't be a real board because you're missing that one component. Well, if you have it in your bylaws and say, well, we can still function, right? That way that won't come up and it's about. So Delonte, do you have anything to add to that?
No. I think it's good to include that because I think that is and would be a potential concern that could happen.
So any other comments? Oh, Commissioner Rodriguez?
Madam Chair, just on page 10, there's this double as at the bottom of the page.
Perhaps we can, there probably is, or other small typos, we can probably look through them again, final polish. Thank you, Commissioner Rodriguez, for finding that. It's highlighted right there with a squiggle.
Yeah. I was like, where is it? All right. All right, that's an easy fix.
Okay, so now moving on, if there's no more discussion of that section to 1.44, leadership. This is also in part, part of the city charter that mandates that we will select, the commission will select its own chair from among the members by vote, using runoff or ranked order voting if necessary. Commissioner, Ridgway?
Madam Chair, we mentioned the possibility of co-chairs already. I'm just wondering if it's necessary, do an amendment to actually say, I mean, I guess we could do chair or co-chairs, but to give that option, that would be, already included in the bylaws/rules.
Commissioner Benito?
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that we actually, and I don't know if this is a conflict because the charter says chair. But I think that co-chairs make a lot of sense for this type of commission. I also think it balances some of the power, and allows for greater representation. And I think this, for this commission, representing the community is really important. So I was gonna suggest that we actually move to change the language to co-chairs, but, I'll also ask Delonte if that creates a conflict with the language in the charter. That was my proposal.
Does create a co-chair create conflict with the charter?
And to the committee chair, I think the way you would keep it is just one person, you call them formally the chair, you meet 1:15, and then you say the other is a co-chair, but you can write duties and responsibilities part to, split that up however you'd like, right? But as long as you have someone that says, I'm the chair, but then you write powers of the chair, you share it with a co-chair, right? So that's how you would do that, meet the law.
Or, I mean, or you can go, or you can add a vice chair, right? So, it depends on how you want to structure, where you want an actual co-chair model or a chair and vice chair model. Which I know sometimes is used interchangeably, but I think there is a difference in when you say co-chair, it's co-chair, it's not a chair and a co-chair,
Yeah.
right? So if you want it to be kind of second in command, then I would recommend using the nomenclature vice chair. But if you want it to actually be two co-chairs, then
Yes.
Commissioner Benito?
I have a quick point of clarification. Would you prefer to be addressed as Madam Chair or Chair Wing or?
Whatever.
Okay, cool. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I did, so now it seems the discussion is, do we need to change the language? Would we like to change the language? Do we need to, vote first on whether we want chairs and co-chairs? Or is that something up for the whole commission?
So to the chair and the committee, you're drafting the rules for them to consider. So tonight you would work out the language you want to propose to them, right? They can choose not to adopt it if you don't have a majority, but so you make whatever edits we want to this tonight. I'll do it in real time, and then we can, if you get through all this and you want to advance it out of committee tonight, it'll go there, and you make your case.
So will we, are we interested in changing any of this language? I will note that there is another point that I'm unclear about. It says, once a term and election cycle is agreed upon, one thing we haven't decided is the term of the co-chairs.
Correct. It's undefined in 115, so that is for the Rules Committee to set. Traditionally, it's been co-chairs for 1 year. So, and that's worked. People, if they want to stay longer, they have a choice to, re-up. If not, then they can go back to their lives. So.
So is that, do we want to adopt that? And if that is amenable, someone make a motion?
I guess I just have a question. So a year, is it like a lot of work to where the people usually burn out, and that's why you do a year?
So with chairs, traditionally what's happened is you met, Ms. Latoya Logan. She was a chair 3 times because once people see how much work it is, not many people want to be the chair. It was rarely contested. So that's just the reality of it. I mean, it's a lot of extra work. You know, allowing people to come back, most times it's not always their choice after that.
Commissioner,
Yes,
thank you.
I had an opportunity to talk to Latoya to get a feel for the idea of co-chairs versus chair and vice. And she says strongly that it should be co-chair. Because on the vice, that person doesn't have the same level of responsibility and authority as the chair. And the other point that she made that I think is relevant is the fact that most of the commissioners have full-time jobs.
Yeah.
And this is a lot of work, especially as we try to get our footing. And with the co-chairs can share that work. You know, after they're in place, they can agree, you take this, I take that, and that responsibility is shared. So I definitely favor the co-chair and not the chair and vice for those reasons.
Okay, thank you so much for that insight from a past commissioner, Latoya.
And if I may, Chair, I can make a recommendation that's real easy to how to add that in there because I anticipated this might happen. So all we would have to do is the commission will select its own chair and a co-chair from among the members. And then here you put duties and powers of the chair and co-chair. So then that's it. That's all the language you need if you want to do it. And you have now a co-chair system. So.
Does that in any way still, I'm just trying to make sure it answers your desire that it will still be listed as chair and co-chair in this bylaw, but the responsibilities will be shared.
Yes.
Okay, so we can, would anybody like to make a motion to make that amendment to the bylaws? One, Commissioner Benito.
I'll make a motion to change the language to say we'll select its own chair and a co-chair, and then under duties and powers of the chair and co-chair, and the chair responsibilities would be shared as determined by the chair and co-chair, and would be shared.
And also, I forgot, do we have any desire to add a term duration? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Thomas?
Sorry, if I could recommend one piece of clarity, I would,
You could remove this, seriously.
bless you. I would recommend in terms of how it reads,
I see what you're saying.
rather than saying chair and co-chair, I would say chair and or co-chairs,
Yeah.
That would,
Very good.
yes.
right?
That would be very
Because it's
good.
either going to be a chair or co-chairs,
Mhm.
not necessarily a chair and a co-chair.
Mhm.
Does that make
But
sense?
that's,
That makes sense.
okay. Yeah, Commissioner Benito?
Well, I think, but it sounds like what we're saying is that we actually want the bylaws to say that we want it to be a co-chair system, not either a chair system or a co-chair.
Yeah, her point is that how do we, then it could be interpreted as either model would apply.
So I guess, so, okay, let me ask a clarifying question then. So then are you guys saying that you want to propose always just having co-chairs in perpetuity, right? Or
Until it's
do
changed.
you allow for the documents for the commission to be able to decide, right? Because here's the thing too, the alternative is, or thing to think about is, what if there aren't 2 people that want to be co-chairs?
Yes.
And you have a situation where only one person actually wants to be in that role. Do you pigeonhole yourselves by saying it has to be co-chairs, right? Or do you
That's
say,
add-on.
or you put the or there
Yeah.
that allows for the group to decide which one is it going to be? You can always say, hey, we're looking to do co-chairs here, you know, who wants to do it? We have space to do it, right?
So the language could say chair and or co-chairs, which give you the option of choosing one or both.
Correct. That's that would be the recommendation if that's,
Or, and
Or,
or a chair and a co-chair. So there, now you have it, you can select your own chair and or a chair. Or,
no,
okay, we'll take the and out of there. So how's that read? The
I
commission
think-
will select its own chair or a chair and a co-chair.
I believe what was discussed was a equivalent, completely balanced co-chair model, both known as co-chair. Is that correct?
right, and that was the distinction that I was making as well, that if you're gonna have equal co-chairs, then there's
no chair.
no chair and co-chair, there's just two co-chairs.
right.
And Commissioner Benito, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, my question is just that then does there need to be language indicating like who makes that, like how does the commission first vote to decide whether they want to have it one chair or co-chairs, or is there any, are we providing any guidance that way?
It's chair and the co-chair.
So-
Oh, wait, I thought we just talked about changing that. I'm confused.
So we can do it this way and or a co-chair. That was Dante's suggestion.
Could I propose another way? I think the other issue is we seem to have a strong preference for co-chair model. You're saying that we may not have two. Is there a way to write it such that the preference would be for the co-chair model? If in the absence of two people being available for the co-chair model, we will proceed with one chair. Okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion, and the language I would suggest would be the commission will select its own co-chairs so that there's no, from among the, and then at the end of that sentence,
New sentence, maybe.
right, and then and then should there only be one, candidate interested for chair, the commission may proceed with a single chair. Oh, yeah.
To the chair, I think the language, I think the R is the distinguishing piece here, so that the commission can select its own co-chairs or a chair, which gives you the option at any time to do both or one without having, to clarify the other language. That option is there, co-chairs or a chair.
I think the.
Yeah, the
right.
R
The
would be
issue
the,
is, right, if I may,
Mhm.
I think the issue is if we want to codify a balance of power with the co-chairs, we don't know what will happen if, if the whole commission decides on a chair model, that maybe it's a split vote, maybe half want the co-chair. It leads to a lot of potential issues. So should we propose this model, as Jason has already stated, that this is a very time-intensive job, so there's pragmatic considerations. I'm just wondering if we need to show preference for one, but also provide the option that it will not stop the commission's work if there are not two candidates available. Commissioner Benito?
I think in practice, the question is, every year, do we want the commission to have a discussion about whether that year they want to do a chair or co-chair? And if that feels like an important discussion, then I think we include that language of chair or co-chairs. But if we don't want that to be a discussion every year and we want the bylaws to indicate a preference for co-chairs, then I think this is the language or something similar to this.
So Chair, if I may,
Yes.
I do see, so the charter says chair, right? So in this next sentence, if you just, let me show you a little, the commission, through its rules, will utilize a co-chair system to meet this requirement. So then we have a clear, so we're saying we're meeting the law, which says we have to have a chair, and the commission will utilize a co-chair system. right? So that way it's defined as how that meets that, because the way I read it before, it just was a little unclear. It says, okay, well, you have to have a chair, but then we're gonna elect co-chairs. It didn't say why we're choosing to do that. So, so that's just a point of, after reading it.
Okay.
So then you would go to,
From among,
yeah, it will select its own co-chairs from the, okay, so then you would do that. So if that just reads a little cleaner to me, if you guys are okay with that.
did we want to, I do notice that there is a lack of clarity. It's just that should there only be one candidate for chair? There should be 4 co-chair, right? And then for the for interested in becoming, maybe,
One person, yeah.
yeah. In serving as a co-chair, the commission may proceed with it. And I do also want to note the duration of the term is not mentioned, if somebody wants to make a motion to add that. Commissioner Benito?
I have 2 questions. One is a question for Jan. Did you think that it was important to have, for the group to discuss, like have that leeway, that the group discusses that every year? I just wanted, and then my second question is, when it says should there only be one candidate, so I'm thinking through, let's say you have 2 people and only one person passes a vote. Does that mean the second candidate that maybe people do not vote them in? So should we say candidate, or should we say if the board only? You see what I'm saying?
Are you saying that there could be a candidate that is rejected completely by the rest of the commission?
Right, and then technically there's more than one candidate, but they weren't approved. I might be getting too in the weeds, but first I wanted to ask that question to Jen.
My preference would be co-chairs, but I mean, it might come a time when we have somebody who is high energy, lots of time, and will be very comfortable as the chair.
Yeah.
Other than that, I mean, I'm going to recommend later on to talk about how often these should be amended and reviewed and amended anyway. So, if we start out with the co-chair model, and we can always go back and amend it, or we can just put the R in there. That could go either way depending on the circumstances at any given time.
To Jan's point, I mean, I think that, I've been in this situation before as well, where, one of my other organizations, and, we had a co-chair model and for a committee, and right now the current person leading that, he's like, no, I don't want a co-chair. Like, I will do this, and I will run this committee and do everything that needs to be done, but I don't want a co-chair. I don't want to have to run every decision by, and come to terms with another person. I want to be able to take the lead and have a number 2 or second in command, right? And so to that point, over time, who knows who wants to ascend in this role and whether or not they're comfortable with sitting in it. So,
And we had that happen before. One person said they would only run, and it was just shot down. They were like, I'll only ever be the chair if you allow me to do it solo. And people didn't like that, because we've had problems with solo people, trying to take too much control for themselves. And people were like, well, that's why we have a co-chair, so that one person can do that, so it was unanimously shot down by the group once they see how a co-chair has some balance there, so.
Are we,
Where do we want to interject the 1-year term part? Do you have a preference?
that has never been in the bylaws?
I didn't, it has been a 1-year term in the bylaws, but I didn't set it in here because, until it was determined. So we can just put it, right on the end of this here, chairs will serve on a 1-year.
The, one potential issue is that we are already into the year. So the first term will be less than a year? Probably won't
Happens.
happen.
Yeah, it happens. It happens every time we seat a new, and then you reset. So if you guys were like January would be a good time, because it's like typically your 4-year term will end right in December, in 4 years in 2027. Those of you that are 4 years, so January is a good time to do it, but you can say no later than February of each, year or something along those lines.
So did we want to add that language somewhere, and where will we add it?
Yeah, that's good. Maybe it's Wednesday at the end.
Put it in here.
So we are adding terms will be 1 year and the co-chair shall be selected no later than February of each calendar year. Jason, it's a THAN.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so are we happy with the amendments that we have made to this section? Commissioner Benito?
Does the candidacy thing, I mean, maybe I'm overthinking it, but with the chair moving back up, should there be only one candidate interested in serving as
You
a
want to say
co-chair?
person, or is that the,
No, I mean, maybe I'm like, yeah, help me out, Charles.
So I think, at least I'm interpreting this to mean like if two people go up, but one person receives lesser votes, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like doesn't receive the threshold of votes
Right.
to be, yeah. So like if you have two people who are saying they want to be, only two people want to be co-chair, but then one person doesn't have the votes to,
so there has to be a vote threshold now?
No, so I think the only scenario we'll run into is maybe someone doesn't get a second for a nomination, but
Oh.
typically they would vote for themselves. So if it was, if 12 people voted for the one and then one person voted for the other person and they were both in the running, then technically you would have a co-chair.
oh.
It would be strange if that occurred, but, because I don't know who would want to put themselves in that
Yeah,
situation with no allies, but,
Yeah, okay.
yeah, but that would be, the thing you'd have to be concerned about is maybe someone won't get a second, but it's never happened. We've always found two people, always, every time, so.
Thank you so much. So we will move on from this section. Is there any more? Commissioner Ridgway?
Yes, to the chair, getting away from Madam Chair. To the chair. The third bullet, that the chair shall act as the spokesperson in all matters pertaining to the commission. So the question to Jason is, does that mean that that person is the point of contact for media, for everything? So does that limit that media contact for other members?
The chair is usually the person who will speak for the committee of the whole. Individual members can speak as subject matter experts on any topic, anytime. And it's just a rule to make sure that everyone's not going around speaking for the whole board. That's what the point of that is, right? So if it's an official board event, it typically goes to the chairs. The chairs will say, I want to do it, or that's some of my area of expertise, call Jan. And that's how it's gone in the past.
So this could read that the chair shall act as the spokesperson in all matters pertaining to the commission. That chair could designate somebody to speak. And I think the other language that you just shared should be here, that other people can, but they're not representing the commission. However, that language is best said. I think it's important to say that because we've had lots of people speaking during this interim period, and I don't know if the message has been the same.
And we can put that here. It's in section 2 too, so it'll come up. There's a whole section on media relations in the second part of rules, so it covers it in more detail. How you would choose people for media appearances, et cetera. So.
But the other thing I would say, if we don't want to specify that language here, that we should see section 2 for further.
It doesn't hurt to have it in both places.
Okay.
So.
So we will move on now to section 1.45, subcommittees. This section already contains some things that we had mentioned we need to discuss about subcommittees must consist of at least 3 persons, but not more than 5. Are there any other issues that we need to discuss in this before we dive into that one? Okay, so I open the floor to discussion. So right now, for everybody else's edification, we have, I believe, 2 temporary committees that have more than 5. Is that true? There were 7 on the budget committee, and there's definitely, and then the hiring also committee,
I think
Charles, right? There's more than 5. So I think we are probably likely in agreement of at least 3 persons. But what do we, is there discussion about, but not more than 5? And that goes to not, I think, excluding anybody, but the, our budget meeting was filled with discussion, so. And then the problem that Mr. Thomas has mentioned is that when we have 7 commissioners, we are actually in a quorum.
Madam Chair, so for the budget and the grant committee, maybe in the future, those could be split up. Because maybe some people were more interested in the budget, so that way they're still on a committee. But we don't have that 7, because I know the budget and grant had a lot of members serving, so that might be an option for the future.
So we are, so we have to, it sounds like, Mr. Thomas, we have to have less than 7 or not vote in the committee.
Yes.
Okay. Then we cannot have 6, that would, can we have 6, or that'd be a tie?
Right.
We can have an odd number, so the only number we can have is 5.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a bit complete. So, now do we have a discussion, do we need to have a discussion of how to handle the committees that now have more than 5?
To the chair.
So,
Oh, you had
Ms. Rodriguez has
I'm sorry.
already mentioned one option is to divide one of the committees up. There's multiple committees that have more than 5, though.
My comment would be that we have some committees that we have nobody appointed to yet. So there is a possibility that we could, shift. Some of those people might willingly shift, knowing that there are other committees that they could work on. We just designated those temp as what we needed to have in place to get started. So there are other committees here that might be, other people might be willing to serve on.
Okay, so, does that, and do we have a timeline to do that, and how, for example, the next committee meeting is when? And it does that, I believe that committee has more than 5.
The training committee is tomorrow. However, this doesn't go into effect until,
We vote on that.
until it's
Okay,
adopted
so-
as a whole, so,
Oh, okay.
So,
yeah.
Commissioner Benito?
I really like Commissioner Rodriguez's proposal of splitting the grants and budget committee, because I do feel like they're pretty different scopes of work. The other proposal that I would make is that for the executive director selection committee and the commissioner training committee, that we turn them into work groups. And they could be under, we could make a committee that's called transition, like, or onboarding, like CPC formation committee. And then it could have sub work groups of the executive director and training, because those are kind of falling under that transition piece. And then the subgroup, the work groups can, I believe, have more than 5, but then not everybody would be on so that would be one.
And the work groups would not have any type of voting, right, authority or anything, so.
No, they would present the information to the committee, and then the committee would make a decision whether to send it to but it would just be a workaround for how more people could have the discussion. And then Yeah, and then also if we wanted to include community members in the executive director search, then that would also be a way to, like, you could have community members on a work group, but you're not required to have, can you have a work group that only has commissioners?
I think that would be a committee then, I think it would just be trying to, change a committee,
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
maybe my proposal is,
yeah.
It still could work. I mean,
Yeah.
are there limits to how many people can be in work groups, or can it become unwieldy, be too many?
We've had some pretty large work groups. I mean, it's ultimately up to what you're trying to achieve. I've never seen a limit put on. It's not as, it'll be public, but we don't do voting in those or anything like that. It goes back to the committee for that. So it's just generating some work drafts usually. So,
Well, Commissioner Brent, you guys?
So with the work group, my only concern is that if somebody might voice something, either in favor or disposition, whatever, that, like, I know we have to go to executive session and, that was kind of protected, hopefully everything that was said, stayed in that room. I'm not sure if we can do that with a work group, so that would be my only contention.
Thomas, you have any
Um,
comment?
I mean, just that, so I guess with that example, I mean, there's literally only like 8, I believe, different topics, right, that could require you to go in executive session. So I guess my point would be everything needs to be open anyway, right? So, and so the sooner we all get used to having to stand by whatever it is we feel and say,
Yes.
the better.
and typically the work group, to avoid even a quorum of a committee, right? So you would just have probably like 2 commissioners on it and a bunch of community members or subject matter experts. You wouldn't typically see a work group have a quorum of a committee on it, because then you have a committee again. So, we're talking about 1 or 2 commissioners from a committee going to do a research topic thing and then bring it back to the committee as a whole as a presentation, right? Say, we worked on this, right? We went to another city and explored how they do something and brought that back and then presented it to the committee. That's kind of like the work group concept there. So,
So to circle back to our conversation, do we need to divide somehow, redesign the subcommittees, or do we need further discussion? Or do we want to keep them temporarily as is? And we haven't adopted the rules yet. But I will say, regardless of the rules, Mr. Thomas, we should not be voting then in the committees that have. Is that going to be a problem, even though these rules are not in place? Because
Voting in
committees that have more than, they have 7. We cannot, because, right, that would be.
right. If and when these rules get adopted by the whole, then yes, then that invalidates any committee structure that's not in accordance with those rules that have been adopted by everyone.
No, but I'm saying in the interim, we will not be able to vote in those committees because we will have a quorum in those committees.
I don't think.
Well, it's not that you can't. It's just that you have a quorum of the whole commission, and now
That makes
there's
a
no
decision.
requirement to take this back to the full commission for the rest of the commission to weigh in or otherwise vote on it, because if 7 people have now,
7 people have to pass the vote though. So we haven't had that happen yet, just for the record. So we
Right.
didn't have a vote where 7 yays occurred yet. But if you did, then it's a moot point to the committee at large. That's what he's saying. So,
Right. So it's kind of twofold, right? If you have a committee of 7, all 7 say yes to something, then that's it. It's done. No need to go to everybody. Now, if there's even one person that says no, then okay, now this is no longer just a committee discussion, because you need 7, to Jason's point, you need the quorum or not just the quorum, but the majority of the entire commission, and having 7 would give you that, right? On the flip side, if you had, no, that's the important thing.
Commissioner Richmond?
To the chair, that could be potentially problematic.
To say the least.
Yes, I would rather make sure we don't put ourselves in a position where that's even a possibility.
Yeah.
So we need to, if we're gonna vote, we need to reduce those numbers
Mm-hmm.
as far as membership on those subcommittees to not meet the quorum,
Yeah.
designation.
And to the chair, I think the suggestion to break grants and budget apart is a great one, because that's your heavy committee right now, so. I think that's a really solid way to solve this problem that we're facing at the moment.
Commissioner Benito?
Yeah, I think that we should keep the 5, and when we adopt these bylaws, or this manual, that we just reduce the numbers, that, we restaff these, because I think part of why the numbers are so high is just because we only have a couple committees right now. And I also think in the interest of the committees operating smoothly, I think seven people is a lot, or more than 5 is a lot to try to really get into the nitty gritty of work. And so I would just say that, and I think as a commission, we're very capable of having people say, okay, I'm on this many committees, I can step aside from there.
My concern though is that it still doesn't solve our problem for the very unlikely possibility of 7 voting yay. In the next committee, it's not just, so the Budget and Grants Committee has already met. We were basically split down the middle, so there was no problem there, and we can split that committee. However, who do we have? We have training that has
We meet on Wednesday though, right?
but there's one meeting, the training, and how many are on that committee? Does anybody know?
Oh, I think I'm on that.
I think it's a full committee.
Yeah, it's everybody.
So
Everybody's on it.
Yeah.
it's a temporary committee, so, but it does determine.
We had it on training, so it's
Oh, okay.
you're not engaged.
Is that-
Unless you took yourself off.
Okay, so it's 6 now, okay.
Okay, so we are safe on, so temporarily, and then we'll vote on this on Wednesday, so I think we're safe, so, okay. Great, so we, do we want to make a motion about the Grants and Budget Committee now? Since we know that we have 7 on that committee?
Yeah.
And how will we split that committee voluntarily, and if everyone wants to be on that committee, what is the drawing it? Name out of a hat? I'm not sure. Commissioner Rodriguez?
I think we probably could ask. Yeah, I think we probably could and see who has interest in what.
Okay,
I think they'll probably do it voluntarily, like.
okay. Should we ask if people want to voluntarily leave the committee and then we don't have the split of the committee, or do we want to split up the committee regardless? Mr. Thomas?
Completely irrelevant. So you may have iPhone charger.
I thought you were making a judgment about our discussion.
So now that I'm thinking, is there a committee without any representation?
We haven't filled other committees because we are in their temporary committees. I don't think, this is the least attended committee, I believe. Yeah, so we're set. Commissioner Ridgway?
To the chair, I think if we explain why we need to make this change, I think there would be people who will voluntarily agree to move to, and especially if we have the other committees available for them to join or sign up for. Yeah.
That's why I was asking, because I know these aren't here. So then you basically assign people here.
Right, and we may need to bring a few people into the one committee. I don't know if there's gonna be equal interest in the grant or the budget committees. So one may need to, if people are interested in one, they should move to, if it's less than 5. And then if the other one needs, the other one's gonna need 1. If say 5 people are interested in grants, then we have 2 left for budget, so budget, yeah, so we need to solicit.
Okay.
You probably pull it from the hiring. We're just trying to figure out, make sure that this can be a standing committee. We gotta have 3, is what I'm trying, you probably could put them.
Well, I think we can solicit more interest at that point, probably. So do we want to propose this right now, or do you want to propose, like, give it to the entire commission as for, maybe they can see another solution? Or do you want to split the committee now?
to the chair, when you say split the committee now, you just mean separating the committee, but not necessarily determining who's on it,
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
Okay.
So who was on you were on that, right? Budget and grant. Based on that, how that meeting went, like, do you see how the work could be split up? Like, it makes sense for it to be?
I mean, you only have your budget one time. If you know, to where a grant, you can continue to work on it. So I can see why they put them together. The only reason why we're separating them is because of the 3 to 5. So I'm not sure if it's like, I think you mentioned, is that because we only have a limited number of committees, and when these other police
Yeah.
committees open up, hopefully soon, then maybe people will sign up for those, and then we won't even have this issue.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm kind of hesitant. So I think maybe we should wait and then see.
Yeah, I was on that committee too. It was split completely down in the base, Commissioner Rodriguez had to break a tie. So my concern is that then that's great because there were interesting discussion there. We can't reproduce that unless we move, right? There will be, it has to be randomly. Unless, right, if people are following two sides and then if one portion goes to one committee, I think you won't get that diversity of
Yeah.
opinion again. So what she's suggesting is that maybe now that people have had a taste of it, do we want to split that committee? How many times do we have to discuss the budget in your?
So the budget process will begin. So you'll have one or two budget meetings in the around July, August, to finalize your budget for each year. The committees are going to have to do their own budgeting too each year. So you're going to anything you want to get done, right? You're going to start thinking about that for each of the police committees on here, and you're going to build your own little budgets, feed it up to the budget committee, right? And work, feed it to the staff so we can work it into that conversation. So one or two meetings a year. With budget, the problem with putting it, now I think about those, no one will want to do the budget. Like, so I'm going to tell you, that's been a task of one commissioner usually, because even though we've had a committee
Yeah,
for it,
that's
like
what I
no
was
one wants to
thinking.
do
It
it.
could be
I think
under
you have most of this
subcommittee.
interest here because it's a grants committee.
I think, I do think that was interest, but the discussion was a lot about but it's salaries and,
Well, that's because
about-
that's what's on her plate.
Right.
Right.
So actually in that committee, we would just have to have one person volunteer to not be in the committee in compliance. So do we want to leave that as is right now? Okay. So,
You would need 2 people.
we have 7, but we can have 6, right?
No.
You have to have odd numbers. Didn't he say that it can be a tie, Delante?
Well, then I mean the chair will always break it.
No, can we have an even number on a subcommittee?
But right now, the bylaws say 5, 3 to 5.
Oh, right.
So we haven't
So we
moved,
we have to change that.
right?
Right, but to avoid the quorum for the entire commission.
So yes, avoiding the quorum issue, I guess could have 6.
That might, if it's a tie. then
And
we
if
just
you
go
change it,
simple.
if you change it to 6, it's usually, half plus 1, so it makes it hard to pass things sometimes when you're at that number, because you have to get to basically a supermajority to get things moving, so.
So, Commissioner Benicio,
I think we should keep it at 5. I just think especially just with, I mean, even thinking for this meeting, we're a little bit over halfway through, right? I mean, it just, more than 5 is a lot
it's a lot
of people, and so I would advocate to keep it at 5.
Right, is there any more discussion about that? Do we need to alert the meeting committee that is going to meet of not to, do we want to make an amendment that they cannot vote for the?
Until you pass this, it's,
Still moves.
you can bring up the point when you present, on Wednesday. And I just want to say, matter of time here.
Yeah.
Still a lot to move on. I don't think you're going to get through this whole thing tonight. So it's okay because you voted to meet not one more time this month, right? I think you guys said every other week for these committees until the business is done. So that just means you might go 2 more weeks until you're officially adopted, but it's okay. So I don't want you to feel like you have to stay to get through all of this. I think you're on a great path, have these discussions, and if it takes one more meeting, you'll be fine, I think, in my opinion. Because that would put you to, the last week of February to maybe present these and adopt, but it's okay if you do that, so.
So we have 10 minutes left till our end time, or designated end time is 7. Do we have interest in completing this section? Is it going to take more discussion, or should we stop, find a better stopping point? Commissioner Benito?
I had a proposal for this section, and I'm not sure if this is the right section for it to go in, but something that I thought was missing to the procedures was a procedure for requesting accommodations. And so I think that needs to be in 2 different places. I think one is for commissioners to request accommodations, and then I think one is for members of the public to request accommodations for meetings. And so I thought that potentially that could, for commissioners requesting accommodations for commission business, I thought that could be in this section, because it seems like that's this is where the kind of commissioner pieces live. And then I thought potentially about meetings and meeting attendance and participation. Oh, not here, maybe, but yeah.
Under, what is called decorum, I believe.
Okay, yeah, in 25. Yeah, so maybe it can wait until then, but that was just something that I wanted to make sure that we included.
Very good. Thank you. So we're done with section 1.45 subcommittees. The next section is staff, which includes executive director appointment, duties, the executive director, removal of executive director staffing levels, reporting structure, and day-to-day operations. Are we willing to move forward with the section that will complete section 1.4? Then that might be a good stopping point. Then it's orientation and training.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so we will proceed. Any discussion, open to discussion for this section?
Are we talking about specifically 1.4.1 or?
1.4.6 we're at
Okay.
now, staff. And 4.1.6, page 12 and 13. 13
And to the chair, that the 1.1, 4.6.1, 1.4.6.18 are 115 language.
Okay. Are there any?
1.4.61B is 115 language.
Okay.
C is 115 language.
Okay.
D is where you would have reporting structure and day-to-day. Now, this is where it just elaborates on what that says. So you have the duties of the executive director in 115. This reinforces the separation. So you guys that's the first part that's non-law that's in here. That came from, as I mentioned, the consultant clearly saying, be very careful and make sure you divide that line well.
Okay. So it sounds like the other sections, are there any issues of clarification that we need from those sections, even though they are part of the charter? So 1.A, 1.B, C. If not, then we can move on to 1.461D.
D as in dog.
D as in dog. Commissioner Benito.
I was wondering if in the section, in the 3rd paragraph, in the absence of an executive director, the chair shall appoint a qualified staff member. I was wondering if we thought that the commission should approve that choice, so that the chair would recommend a staff member to be interim, and then the board would approve that. Because right now, the chair, and then if there is no chair, it would be a majority of the board, but right now the chair would make that decision alone, or the co-chairs would make that decision alone.
I think that's a good idea.
Would we like to make Are there other things that, in that section, before we make a motion to amend? We've added in third paragraph that in the absence of an executive director, the majority of the board shall appoint rather than the chair. Or actually, it said or majority board by a vote in absence of chair. We want to make it clear that it is the majority of the board shall appoint a staff member. Who would like to make a motion for that amendment?
I move that the majority of the board shall appoint a qualified staff member to serve as interim in the position.
In the absence of the executive director. So we're making that amendment. Do we need to take a roll call? Or are we all in unanimous? Unanimous consent? Okay. All right, so motion to amend is approved. And then we are at a point that at the end of a section, the next section is about orientation and training. We are,
What about halfway?
yeah, good.
Do we,
Good
Chair,
progress.
do we want to, try to set a time and date now or, before we break? It's a small group, so it should be easy. The last one was too many people to do that.
Right. So are we bringing forward what we have right now on Wednesday to,
So the typical agenda will have a report out, so you'll just give the status of what you accomplished so far. So if you're not ready to bring something forward to vote, you just say, we've met and discussed, we've made some amendments, but we're not all the way through. We expect to be completed by, simple.
are we in agreement that we can do that, or were there things that we want to gauge?
That would be the preference, I think, that we just do a status report. And then once we have completed the package, we move the whole package to the full assembly.
And then we can explain the different changes
Exactly.
that was made. And he hasn't highlighted, so we're different text, so
We got a good record of the changes, so it'll be easy to present.
Yes.
Thank you. So, let's set a meeting. Sorry, Mr. Thomas?
Just one additional piece too, is that once you guys do kind of decide on, kind of what this document looks like that you want to put forward, you may also want to invoke a legal review as well to make sure that what you're putting forward doesn't violate any
Yeah.
law, right? So we can probably assign someone in the law department to, take a look.
I think that's good.
Thank you so much for that wonderful suggestion. So we are planning our next meeting. We have another section and made good progress today. When are we able to meet? And how long should we wait? It does seem of vital importance that the rules be adopted as soon as possible. So if your schedule can accommodate an earlier date, that would be much appreciated.
So one point I would say is, the 20th is a city employee holiday. It is a President's Day, so we won't, staff will not be able to, attend on the 20th, which would be 2 weeks. So the next public meeting of the full commission in 2 weeks would be the 22nd. So, the goal would be to try to get before the 22nd to get this done. Yeah. If we're following the cycle.
Could we meet next week?
So that is the week of the 13th to the 17th.
Would the 13th at the same time work, the Monday?
Does that Monday? Does that work for everybody? Same time? Does someone need to make a motion for that? Or,
I suppose you could, or you could just say,
I move for our next meeting to be the 13th from 5 to 7 p.m.
thank you.
Eastern Standard Time.
second.
Thank you. And I'm assuming unanimous consent from that. Yes, I'll say aye. And we will meet next, Monday, February 13th, from 5 to 7 in this office. Great. And it will be live streamed. So we are at the conclusion of our business for today. Would anybody like to make a motion to adjourn?
Unanimous consent for adjournment.
Unanimous consent?
Yeah.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you so much for your contributions and time today and for people listening.
Are you getting?